Hello everyone, welcome to Wind Down Wednesdays. I'm your host Paula Taylor and this is episode 160. So today we are going to talk about self-care, and the title of today's topic is Self-Care is Not Selfish. And it's so funny, I have so many topics in mind from my trip to Bali. It brought up a lot of things that I want to talk about and share, but this idea of self-care has been coming up so much in my practice this week, as well as I'm seeing it reflected in social media. There's a lot of really intense energy that's coming in right now. It's going to keep increasing at least through the middle of next month, in June of 2024. But self-care is never a bad idea. So let's talk about kind of what I'm talking about, why. And the first thing I want to say is that self-care has sort of this bad reputation. It has this reputation for being kind of frivolous. This idea of like, oh, I'm going to go get pampered at the spa, that's what self-care is. And this could not be farther from the truth. Self-care is literally how we take care of ourselves so that we don't get sick. You can think of self-care like doing preventative maintenance on your car. If you don't change your oil, eventually the oil goes bad, it destroys the engine. That is what we're talking about with self-care. And self-care is a very broad phrase. We're going to kind of go into some different types of self-care. But just right off the bat, I want to point out, self-care is not selfish. There's this saying that I see a lot that people say about you can't give from an empty cup. And this is essentially this idea of self-care. If I don't take care of myself, I can't take care of other people. And this really came very centered for me when I was on my trip to Bali, because in order to do that, in order to be there and be present in the way I wanted to be, this was not a pleasure trip for me. Absolutely, I got a great amount of pleasure. But this was a work trip for me. And just as I do here in my office when I work with clients, I have to do a lot of self-care, a lot of energetic hygiene, physical care, emotional care. Self-care covers all of that, because if I am going to be fully present for someone else and hold space for them to make change, to expand and clarify, harmonize their frequency, to heal, I have to be able to do that. Physically, I have to be able to do that. Emotionally, I have to be able to do that. Energetically and spiritually, I have to be able to do that. Mentally, I have to be able to do that. So self-care, quite simply, is taking care of yourself so that you can show up to whatever degree that is. I like to be fully present whenever I can. And it depends on what your goal is. But I think most of us, and if you're watching or listening to this, you're somebody who wants to be fully present in their life or get closer to that. You cannot do that without self-care. So let me talk a little bit about how I did self-care on this trip to Bali, because I think it's going to illustrate just how broad this topic is. I also want to point out that self-care sometimes is choosing not to do something rather than choosing to do something. So yes, sometimes I go and I receive from other people. I go and receive energy work. I go and receive physical massage. That is part of self-care. But a huge part of self-care that's been a big part of my journey over the last year especially is learning to say no, is learning when something is not aligned with you and having the courage, the vulnerability to be able to stand up for yourself and say, this is not something that I can do. And I told a big story about that last week. If you want to go back and listen to last week's show, Endurance versus Pleasure, I talked about the very second day in Bali, I ended up having to say no to something that I kind of wanted to do out of self-care. And in that situation, I got all the way to a full-blown panic attack before I finally accepted all of the signs that my body especially was giving me about saying no. I was not listening because I thought, well, if I can just get through this part, if I can just endure this, I can find the pleasure. And we talked about that, and that's a little bit of a baseline to this topic. As always, you don't have to have listened to that, but I highly encourage you to go back and listen to that. We talked a lot about nervous system activation as well. Endurance as that sympathetic fight, flight, freeze, fawn response versus pleasure as the ease, parasympathetic kind of rest and digest mode. And here's the thing. We want to be in the stretch zone, what my friend Barbara Collier calls the stretch zone. So in order to grow, in order to learn, we need to push ourselves outside of our comfort zone. But if we go so far outside of that comfort zone that we end up fully triggered in trauma triggering in that sympathetic fight, flight, freeze, fawn mode, then the learning actually shuts down. So there's this negotiation out of sort of full comfort zone, what we might call a green zone, into like this stretch zone, this sort of yellow zone, like, oh, it's a little bit uncomfortable, but I think I'm okay, into the full-blown red of that trauma triggering, of that sympathetic response, the fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And self-care, a big part of self-care is learning how, first of all, to get out of that triggered response, because we're always going to get triggered. It's part of the nature of being alive. How quickly can I come back into a state of regulation? And then also, again, knowing when to say no to things that we know are going to push us into that red zone. So let me talk about the self-care that I did in Bali. Again, just to kind of illustrate, self-care is all the things. Yes, self-care is receiving body work, which some people consider frivolous. I would consider, again, like getting an oil changed on the car. Especially as a body worker, if I don't receive body work, if I don't keep my body healthy and able to move, I can't do my job. And that's pretty much true for most of life. If your physical vessel, if you're not taking care of your physical vessel, you're not going to be alive. We might be spiritual beings having a physical experience, but we need the physical vessel in order to function. So physical self-care is important. Mental self-care is important. Emotional self-care, extremely important. And then the energetic spiritual self-care that I think underlies all of these things. So the first thing I'm going to say is that one of the biggest things, perhaps not surprisingly, because I say this over and over again, one of the most important aspects of self-care is awareness. You have to know yourself in order to care for yourself. You have to know your tools. You have to understand how to use them. What is going to work for me in this current situation? And that can change from moment to moment. It can change depending on what you've been exposed to. I had a really interesting discussion with my psychiatrist yesterday about some of the difficulties that I had in Bali. And I said, I feel like maybe if I got a diagnosis of having autism, that would help, because I'm pretty sure I do, but I've never been diagnosed with that. And we had a long discussion. And at the end of the discussion, he said, I can send you for testing and you could get a diagnosis. But frankly, if I were you, I wouldn't give a fig about getting a diagnosis. He didn't use that word, but we'll go with that, because you know yourself so well that you know what your triggers are, you know what your sensitivities are, you know what your limitations are in terms of when you've gotten overloaded, when you're getting out of that yellow and into the red zone, and you know how to bring yourself back into the green. That is one of the things that self-care teaches us. We have to learn how to take care of ourselves. Most of us did not have healthy self-care modeled to us. We had parents who were burned out. We had parents who were overwhelmed. We had parents who were sometimes abusive. So learning how to care for yourself is a huge part of this journey. It doesn't just like magically appear. And a lot of this is kind of trial and error, because I can tell you my self-care, I'm going to go through that. My self-care might not be your care. I am an introvert. I need a lot of alone time to recharge. This really came up for me in Bali, and it was a little bit of, I wouldn't say a struggle, but I felt a little bit like I was the odd one out sometimes because I kept taking time to myself. But I also know, after years of working on myself, that if I don't do that, I will get completely depleted and eventually I will get sick, because I need that alone time to recharge. I need to release energy that I've picked up from other people. I need to recharge my own energy. And the other thing is, some people, I think it's both. It's not a either or, it's a yes and. We pick energy up from other people, but other people's energy also triggers our own energy. So when I was in this group a week, things are going to come up. Everybody took turns having emotional releases, which is awesome. That's why I was there. That was the work I was there to do, was kind of this energetic growth and helping hold space and allowing myself to hold space for other people as well. All of that was part of this journey. You cannot be fully present for that depth of work without performing self-care, without taking care of yourself. So the very first thing I did was I took medication to be on the plane, the 15-hour plane ride especially. I have a prescription for some sort of a tranquilizer. I think it's Xanax, I'm not even sure. Almost never use it. Absolutely will take it for a plane ride that long. And if I had not taken that, I would have made it there because I would have been trapped on the plane, but I would have been in such a dysregulated state by the time I landed. I would have had all this work to do to get myself out of it. That's the other thing about self-care. Again, this is preventative maintenance. This is like I'm taking my car in to get the oil changed so that I don't have a huge problem down the road. So I could have not taken medication to fly. I've done it before. I didn't take it for the shorter flight. The first one from Tucson to LA was about 2 hours. I took my Dramamine for motion sickness every flight, but I didn't take the calming medicine until the longer flight because I know what my limitations are a little bit. I hadn't flown since 2019, but I was kind of playing around with this a little bit. I thought, okay, 2 hours. First of all, I didn't want to be groggy when I got to the next airport. It was only 2 hours. I thought I'll save it for the long flight. And that worked out fine. That flight went well. I felt okay. I didn't feel super dysregulated. Let's face it, traveling by air is triggering for most of us in some way. There's crowds, which I have a hard time with. There's the actual landing and taking off and the turbulence, which I have motion sickness, so there's that. And then there's just the anxiety of being in a place with a lot of people and a lot of energy trying to get there, not wanting to miss your connection. All of these things, dealing with baggage, it's just a very stressful experience. I think most people would agree. There's a lot of stress around that. And so one of the tools I have is pharmaceutical medication to help, just at a very low dose, keep me calm. And on that 15-hour flight from LA to Hong Kong, absolutely, that made a huge difference. And I could actually feel, because I had to take it more than once, I could feel it when it wore off, this feeling of like claustrophobia and kind of, I gotta get out of here. And again, I used other tools. I used breathing, I used calming meditation, I used music, but sometimes those tools aren't enough and we need physiological help. So I took the physiological help. That was self-care. That's another thing I want to point out, is that sometimes we're guilty of thinking that we don't deserve help or we shouldn't accept help from outside of us, or we think I should only do things that are natural. And that's fine if that's where you're living. But my feeling is I'm going to use every single tool at my disposal, as long as it's not dangerous. If it's dangerous, it's not a tool. But if it's something that helps me, if it's something that works for me, if medication helps you, take the medication. Like, yes, it has to be processed through your body. This is a medication I've taken once or twice in the last 5 years because it's pretty much all I use it for is flying. That was my self-care. Taking care of myself through using all the other tools I had to kind of keep myself calm and regulated, and adding a little bit of medication to help with the physiology of that. Self-care. So when we got to Bali, I immediately got on this van in the traffic that was just incredible. It was like walking into a wall of heat. And I realized right away I was going to have to take more motion sickness medicine or I wasn't going to make it to the hotel feeling okay. So again, self-care, taking the medication I needed. That is absolutely self-care. One of the other things I discovered right away on that second day was, for me, and I think for everyone, and I think this might actually be, there's two aspects of self-care that are really hard. maybe more. Knowing yourself, really knowing yourself, very difficult. But then actually doing what you know you need is really hard. Whether that's actively doing something, whether that's accepting, receiving, allowing yourself to receive, and also opting out of things. For me, that's one of the hardest things because it does make you stand out in a way. You know, we're kind of raised with all this peer pressure around kind of fitting in and conforming and going with the group. And Liz, who was in charge of this retreat, did a very good job at the very beginning of sort of saying everything is optional. This is all consent based. You know, even if something's a yes, if like 2 minutes later it's a no, then it's a no. But that does require you to really know yourself well enough to recognize and act on it when something is a no. And I talked about in the story that I told last week about going to this water temple, I was being given repeated no's I woke up in the night before, and spiritually I had this feeling that like, you're not meant to go here. It was sort of like a message. This is not a place for you to go. Like spiritually, energetically, it felt almost like I wasn't welcome there, which I thought was really interesting. And then I was trying to unpack that because there was some grief stuff coming up. That will be another show, an entire show, I think. When I got there, my body was telling me no. It was hot. I was already like kind of overwhelmed. The van ride was very dysregulating because it was kind of sickening. And even though I'd taken medication, we were stopping and starting and stopping and starting and weaving. And so my system was already pushing toward that red zone by the time we even got there. Then it was so hot and it was so crowded and we were walking and it was like I was getting hotter, and like I could tell as we were going down into this thing, I was just getting more and more into that red zone, more and more into that sympathetic response, that flight. For me, it's usually flight or fawn. And that's the other interesting thing, is that flight and fawn will sometimes fight each other, because the fawn part of me was like, just go along with the group, don't create problems, just do this. Even though there was no pressure from outside of me, there were other people who were not doing this. And I could have right away said, nope, I think I'm going to sit this one out. Would have been fine. But internalized history of me thinking I need to go along with the group. And also there's what some probably no one anymore calls FOMO, or fear of missing out. It's like, I want to participate in this. You know, there's that pleasure part of it. I want to do this. Emotionally, mentally, I kind of wanted to do it, but emotionally, physically, it was not something that I could do in that sustainable physiology, in that green zone, in that rest and digest mode, or even in the yellow. But sometimes, again, trial and error. So I was already like pretty far into the yellow. We were walking down to this temple. It was packed full of people, this area where you were supposed to be changing. It smelled bad. It was loud. All of these things are triggers for my sensory sensitivities. And I went full on into the red and like was completely panicked and was like, I got to get out of here. I got to get out of here. And as I mentioned last week, the women were wonderful and they helped me get my sarong back on. And I was trying to run out and there were so many steps. I had to keep stopping and I was kind of hyperventilating and I had a lot of grief stuff coming up. So by the time I got to the van, I was kind of a hot mess and I was crying. I was full in the red, but I know how to get out of that. And I took myself out of the situation. Should I maybe have never gone into it when I was already that close? I can't answer that for sure. Maybe there was some part of me that really needed to try it so that I know that I tried. Do I regret not going in? I don't. I'm actually very proud of myself for finally listening to all the messages my body was sending me, telling me this is not for you. And that moment on, as I mentioned last week, I started thinking about endurance versus pleasure. But the other part of this is I started thinking in terms of self-care. What do I need to do to take care of myself in this situation? What do I need to do? Because I was completely focused on all of the healing things we were there for. So some of the kind of more vacation-y things, adventuresome things, I ended up saying no to so that I could focus on the healing work, because that was my focus. That's what I wanted to be there for. So again, knowing myself, knowing what my focus was, knowing what I wanted to be there for, allowed me then to figure out what my self-care was in various moments. At one point during this trip, The food that was provided for us was mostly vegetarian, which I have no problems with. And in fact, I was kind of excited because my husband's allergic to soy. So I actually like tofu. There was a lot of tofu and tempeh and different options. But there was, and this is pretty frequently the case in vegetarian food, there was a lot of bell peppers, and I call it a mild allergy. If I eat bell peppers, or sometimes even if they're in a sauce, I get really, really, really bad digestive issues. And so for me, my self-care was avoiding that stuff. But at a certain point, a few days in, I realized I need a really good solid protein source. Protein is very grounding. When you're moving a lot of energy, protein can help kind of settle things and ground things. And I was like, I need to find some meat. I'm going to go out to a restaurant and I'm going to find myself a burger. And I looked online and I found a place. And then it was one of these days where a lot of things changed. And so then a big group of us ended up going. We had a beautiful meal. I got my burger. I felt so much more grounded, so much better. And again, that was part of my self-care. What does my body need? My body was calling for a lot of rest. There's a 15-hour time difference. It's 15 hours later. There was 40 hours of travel to get there. And so there were times that I did not go to something because I needed to rest. There was one day in particular I wanted to go out. They were supposed to go one place that I had decided not to go, and then decided to go to this other temple and shopping. And the decision happened last minute, and I had just gotten back to my room. That was the day we did a big breathwork session, moved a huge amount of energy. And then I did my dimensional frequency expansion experience, moved a huge amount of energy, was holding space for the women that were having that experience. That is very tiring, and I needed rest after that. So instead of going on this trip that I kind of wanted to go on, I realized, nope, I need to stay here and rest. It's important for my body to rest. My body's telling me it needs rest. And so I listened. I listened to my body. And the other thing about this too that I will say is, the better you know yourself, the more you trust yourself, the more you listen to yourself, the better care you can take of yourself, and the more this becomes part of your routine. So there were all these different things. Needing alone time. Sometimes it was for physical rest. Sometimes it was for emotional, energetic rest. In the evening, many of the nights, the women would kind of gather in this common room and play Uno, just kind of hang out and talk. And it was a space with all hard surfaces, and it was very loud and very echoey. And one of my sensitivities is sound. And also just being in big groups, especially after all the energy we've been moving, I'm just more naturally a kind of a one-on-one small group person. When you get more than about 4 or 5 people, I start feeling a little bit overwhelmed and kind of a little bit triggered, to be honest. So one of the nights, I actually made a TikTok and posted it. The women were downstairs and I could hear them, and they were talking and laughing. They were having a beautiful time. If I had been in that space with them, I would have been triggered. It would have just been a little bit too much for me, too loud for me. I know that about myself now. I know my sensitivities, and my feet were so swollen, which apparently flying long journeys will do that to you. Being on an airplane for a long time, didn't know that. And it was very humid, and we were standing and walking a lot, and I thought, I need to put my legs up the wall. That's what my body was asking for. I needed rest, but I didn't want to go back to my room yet. So I went up to the yoga shala, which was above the common room, this beautiful open air, wide expanse room, got one of the yoga mats out and put my legs up on the little railing. And it was really cool because I was directly above the women below me, and I could hear them, and I felt like I was part of their energy. I wasn't fully immersed in it. I was kind of above it, and I was having my own experience. I had a little bit of music playing. I had my phone on my belly, was doing some deep breathing. I ended up posting a little TikTok because I just felt so beautiful and expanded. And so for me in that moment, my self-care was kind of being of the group, but not in it. Being just outside the group, feeling the energy of the group, kind of relishing that beautiful camaraderie of the women and hearing them talking and laughing and having such a great time, but then kind of being somewhat separate and like having that energy in my space, but also having my own space that I needed as an introvert to kind of recharge. And then physically helping my body. I had my legs at the wall for like 30 minutes. Oh, it was amazing. I felt so much better afterwards. So the other thing is that self-care has a huge reward. When we take the time to understand what we need, to listen to that, to act on it, then we can start to, it creates this positive feedback loop. And it's really funny, since I've been home, I've been thinking about like, man, I was so focused on self-care in Bali. And I felt that kind of shift when I got home, because I got home and it's like, okay, I got to focus on this and this and this and this and this. And it was like my attention got divided. But the most interesting thing about this is that I accomplished exactly what I set out to in Bali. I went there to see what it's like to run a retreat. I went there to meet and mingle with extraordinary women. I went there to do healing work both with myself and others, was able to offer the dimensional frequency expansion, which was like a dream come true. It was like just such a beautiful experience of people who really wanted to be there and really wanted to be in the energy in this beautiful, amazing location. You know, all the things that I received, all the things we did together ceremonially. Taking a day alone at the beach was a huge self-care thing for me. And again, one of those days that I was like, I'm not going to go do what the trip, the excursion is. I'm not going to ride 2.5 hours each way to get out to this waterfall and hike. I just knew I didn't want to be in the van. The heat was getting to me. It was just not something that felt aligned with me. I'm a beach person. We were 10 minutes from the beach, 10 minutes walk. And I'm like, I'm walking to the beach. And I had walked a couple times already. So I knew how to get there, kind of knew what the setup was. There were all these beautiful restaurants and bars like along the beach, right up against the beach. So like I just walked down and sat down in the first one and had some iced tea and had a beautiful chocolate croissant that was also nice grounding chocolate. I ended up calling my friend from home, who I never have time to talk to here because I'm so busy. We had a beautiful conversation for a while. I got to sit and just be with the ocean. And I got this experience of feeding myself mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually by honoring what my system was asking for, which was alone time. And I had actually had plans to go with another woman shopping that morning, and I texted her and I said, you know, I hope I'm not disappointing you, but I'm really feeling called to spend some time alone today. And then she wrote back and said, I want to spend some time alone too. And it was like amazing. And then we met up later and I had kind of a late lunch and she had already eaten. So she had a drink and another woman joined us and it was just so beautiful. I may have already told the story last week. Oh well. Lots of Bali stories. They may get retold in a different context. The point is, if I had not listened to myself, if I had sort of forced myself to go on this excursion, which for many years I would have done, that there would have been that, you know, you don't want to miss out on something and this is what you came here for and this is part of the thing and you need to do all the things. I would have been in such a dysregulated state that whole day. It would not have been enjoyable to me. And the conversation I was having with my psychiatrist yesterday was like, there's a part of me that regrets that. There's a part of me that wishes I didn't have the sensitivities that I have because it makes things difficult. It makes it hard to constantly have to tell people, like, I'm sorry, it's too loud for me. And I wear earplugs. I bring earplugs with me. I've gotten used to just being the weirdo with earplugs. Like, I don't care so much about that. But even sometimes with earplugs, it's too much. Or being in a big crowd, it's just too much. And especially, again, with all the energy we were moving and all the expansion we were doing, like, I just needed a lot of time to process. And so to be able to express that, and to be able to have that be understood to the extent that people who don't have those same kind of needs can understand them was really beautiful. But it also brought up some feelings in me about, like, why is it so hard to take care of myself? That's probably the question. Why do I need so much? Why do I need different things than other people do? Why do I need so much quiet? Why do I need so much downtime? Why do I need so much alone time to recharge? And at the end of the day, we had a really beautiful discussion, and it was kind of like, I can't change those things. I have done so much trauma healing, and I know now where is that transition out of green into yellow, out of red. And sometimes, you're never going to know. You've got to push a little bit. Going to Bali was a huge leap outside of my comfort zone. Traveling by myself, flying alone, flying 40 hours, being somebody that has multiple factors that make it difficult for me to fly. I did all of that, and all of that gave me so much self-confidence. I feel so much more reassured that I can do that, because I want to go and host retreats. I needed to know if I could even go to one, but I also needed to see how much self-care was going to be required for me to really hold my space, for me to stay in alignment, for me to state the intention of why I was there and stick to it. And I did those things, and the reason I was able to do that is because I was focused on self-care. So now as I come back into my regular life, it's got me thinking, I just looked, it's 3:33 on the clock, pretty cool. It's got me thinking about how important it is to maintain that intention. How if I had not been so focused on the self-care, taking care of myself exactly as I needed in Bali, I would not have been able to do the things that I set out to do for myself energetically and emotionally. And one of those things, it's so cool, and this is going to be a whole show too, I think. The day we got there, she asked us, why are you here? And then there were different ways to kind of explore that. There was this really cool little mini vision board that you could make and all of these things, but she had, for some reason, she had blank drawing paper and colored pencils. And I'm like, give me the paper. I can't draw, but give me the paper. And as I started drawing, I realized that the reason I was there, yes, there were, I want to see what it's like to run a retreat. I want to go to a retreat. I want to go to Bali, of course. I want to meet these women and sort of be immersed in this beautiful spiritual and healing experience. But like, what's the personal reason? What's my personal kind of healing goal here? And it was to fully integrate my quantum body, which I brought up. Go back 3 or 4 episodes, I talked about what's the deal with star seeds is the one where I talk about what I call the quantum body. And I think the episode I'm going to do, I think we're going to call it Embracing Multidimensional Living. This idea that I have a physical body, I have an energetic body associated with that, but I have these aspects of myself that exist on the quantum plane that are not part of this human experience. I have these seraphim wings. I have this Mintakan body. And I use them. I use them to help in the healing work that I do. And so part of this, my goal, which I didn't realize until I had this piece of paper in front of me and I was drawing it, was to fully integrate and embody this quantum aspect of myself, this multidimensional aspect of myself. Absolutely no way I could have done that if I had not been focused on self-care. So while it may seem, people might tell you this is frivolous, this is unimportant, or it may seem like it's at the bottom of your to-do list. I'll get to this when I get to this. What I am urging you to do, what I'm urging myself to do, and especially right now with the really intense energy that's going to keep coming in this year and probably for years to come, this is like, we're stepping things up here. We're leveling up, people. And what that means is we've got to have more space to accommodate that energy. How do we get more space? How do we get more expansion in our field? How do we calibrate ourselves to accept that flow of energy? It is through self-care. And receiving from other people. That's part of self-care. Sometimes self-care is going like, man, I don't know what to do about this pain in my arm. I got to go see a physical therapist. I got to go see an acupuncturist. I've got to find someone else who can help me with my self-care. That absolutely is self-care. Receiving, allowing yourself to receive from other people. And again, if we push that to the top of our list, as I saw for myself in Bali, the expansion that comes from that is much greater than we could access if we were not prioritizing that self-care. So self-care is not selfish. We have other people to take care of in our lives. And that is one thing when I was in Bali, I was totally focused on myself. I was there by myself, but there were other people to take care of. All of the women, it's so beautiful, taking care of each other and nurturing each other, and somebody would need something and somebody would give them something. So we were still giving to each other, absolutely. And again, it's a kind of a trite statement, but this idea of we cannot give from an empty cup. You cannot pour out something from your cup if your cup's not full. And how do you fill your cup? It's with the self-care. And it's all levels of being. And it starts with knowing yourself, knowing what you need. I know, whether I have an official diagnosis or not, that I have a ton of autistic tendencies, and they manifest in the form of sensitivities. Sensitivity to sound, sensitivity to smell, sensitivity to touch sometimes, sensitivity to the energy of people around me. But here's the thing, those sensitivities are also what make me an incredible holder of space for healing. I'm not going to call myself a healer because I'm holding the space for you, but I can sense the energy that needs to be moved, and I can hold space to help you move that because I'm sensitive. I can hear the frequencies of dimensional frequency expansion, call them into this reality and share them with you because I am so sensitive to sound. So sometimes I say your sensitivities are your superpowers. Sometimes it doesn't feel that way. Sometimes it feels like those things are your kryptonite. It feels like they're your downfall. It feels like they limit things for you. But what I found in Bali, what I started to recognize and celebrate and really understand, wow, I didn't know I was going to get emotional about this, is that the things that limit me in one area expand me in another. So no, I couldn't get on a bus for 2.5 hours and hike down to a waterfall. It wasn't part of, as if I'm taking care of myself, that's not something that I'm going to do in this particular situation. What I can do is sit with someone and hold space and help them have a big realization about something that needs to change in their life and help them move the energy to do that. And that is my superpower. So if having that superpower means that I have to say no in other areas, that I have to limit some of the things that I do in other areas, I'm going to do it. And if people don't understand that, that's okay. I don't need them to. I need to just understand for myself what it is that I need. I need to be able to do that, including saying no when that is what I need. And I need to just focus on what I'm here to do without worrying about what other people think about it, or if I'm putting someone else out, or if it seems weird. If I seem weird, that's from an early age. I've been a weirdo, and that's been a trigger for me. And like, I'm a weirdo. I accept it. I own it. I'm starting to love it. Pretty beautiful. So for today's meditation, I have no idea what we're going to do. I usually have some idea. I don't know. We're going to do something around self-care. We'll see what comes up. I can tell you what we are going to do. We're going to do oxytocin breathing because that's one of the best easiest and best and quickest self-care tools I know of. So let's meditate together. So for this meditation, I think it might be nice to lie down if you have access to that. If you don't, that's fine. If you're sitting, just make sure you're really comfortable, you're really supported. This is a really nurturing meditation. We're stepping into this exploration of self-care and this recognition that self-care is not selfish. That in fact, self-care allows us not only to care for ourselves more deeply, but to care for others. So find a position that feels really supportive, really comfortable. If you're sitting up, you might want to lean against something. If you're lying down, you might want to put something underneath your knees just so you get really comfortable. And one of my favorite tools for self-care that we do pretty much every single meditation is oxytocin breathing. So this type of breathing vibrates the nerves that in turn vibrate the vagus nerve. This is the nerve that tells us to to come out of fight, flight, freeze, fawn, out of the sympathetic response and into rest and digest or parasympathetic mode. This is one of the goals of self-care, is to really fully be in this rest and digest, to really fully be in our body, to feel safe and to be calm. So we're going to breathe in through the nose. I'm going to allow the breath to float out, belly floating out strongly, really breathing all the way down to the bottom of your pelvis. As you sigh that breath out through the mouth, you're going to use an audible ha sound from high to low. That's what vibrates those nerves that vibrate the vagus nerve. So I'll do one with you. We're going to do at least 5 of these today. I'll just do one with you, allowing the breath to float in. So do at least 4 more of those. And just notice, this might be the first time all day that you've taken a deep breath. And that alone is a huge step towards self-care. So when we breathe deeply, we are oxygenating our blood. We're helping the body physiologically, vibrating that vagus nerve, telling the body to relax, physiological shift in the body. As we breathe deeply, I would encourage you to continue with those oxytocin breaths, if that feels good to you while we talk about this. It calms the mind. Deep breathing calms the mind. It allows the mind to slow down, allows the body to slow down. It allows the emotions to settle. And sometimes what happens when we breathe deeply is that then we notice some of the discomfort in our bodies. We notice the uncomfortable emotions, and that's good too, because we can't shift something without awareness. So as you're breathing deeply, perhaps you're noticing some tension in the body. You're noticing that you feel a little bit anxious or fearful or angry. Don't make any effort to change any of that yet. Just breathe into the feeling. So if your neck feels tight on your next inhale, focus that breath directly into the neck. And then as you sigh it out, just imagine some relaxation coming into the neck. And then you might notice the discomfort shifts. That's not our focus. That's not necessarily our intention. Our intention is just to bring calm, to bring relaxation. But what often happens is that while we're doing that, the tenseness in the body or the tense emotions that are coming up will actually begin to dissipate. So if you're noticing, maybe you're noticing a little bit of anxiety in your chest or your belly, a little bit of worry about something that's coming up, take a deep breath into that area where you feel like you're holding the emotion. And then as you sigh that out with the audible ha sound, just notice if there's a shift. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 deep breaths. So what we're going to focus on for this meditation is using this oxytocin breathing as one of the simplest self-care tools I know to shift multiple levels. Energetically, we're drawing energy in. As we breathe in, we're releasing energy that doesn't serve the highest good as we breathe out. So that's the energetics of this breath. So find the area in your life that is craving more self-care. So what I mean by that is maybe it's your body. Maybe your body's been feeling off. Maybe you've been feeling sick. Maybe you've been feeling extra tired. Maybe you've been feeling physically unwell in whatever way that is. If that's what comes to you, we're going to focus on that. Maybe you've been having a lot of emotional turmoil. Maybe you've got a lot of difficult emotions coming up. Maybe there's a difficult situation in your life. Maybe you're calling for emotional self-care. That's where you're going to want to focus. So the beginning of this is awareness, knowing where I want to focus. And again, knowing you can come back and do this as many times as you want with all sorts of different areas of focus. Maybe it's mental. Maybe you feel like your brain is foggy, or maybe you feel like your thoughts are racing. Maybe you feel like you're having a hard time remembering things. So you want to make your focus mental then for self-care in this moment. And this will, of course, change from moment to moment. So I encourage you to come back and do this again. You can make this meditation a regular self-care tool to tap into what you're needing. And maybe it's energetic. Maybe you're energetically aware that there's some holding or stagnation in your body. Maybe it feels like there's something in your field that's just not quite right. And a lot of times the energetics is that feeling like something's just not right. I can't put my finger on it. I can't label it. Something just feels off. You might need energetic self-care. So whatever you're focusing on, just sit for a moment and allow yourself to focus on that area of your life. I need more self-care in this area, and just bring the awareness to begin with. Maybe look a little bit at what you've been dealing with and how you've been coping with that. Maybe the coping mechanisms you're using, the tools that you have, are not serving to actually care for yourself in that situation. Sometimes we actually sabotage ourselves unconsciously, unintentionally. Sometimes we're aware of it and we do it anyway. Be like knowing that you need to not eat a certain food and eating it anyway. That's an easy example. But this can happen on all levels of our being. Maybe you know that when you go to this certain place, you always leave feeling worse emotionally afterwards, but somehow you find yourself going there anyway. So just noticing if anything like that comes up, any patterns, any habits. We're just kind of checking in here, bringing some awareness. Continue with that oxytocin breathing if it helps. Anytime you feel like you need to release, breathing out through the mouth is going to facilitate that energetically. Adding that ha sound can really beautifully help with that. As you continue to breathe deeply, you can let go of the ha sound and just keep breathing deeply in through the nose, out through the mouth. You're already moving energy in your system just by bringing some awareness around where you might need to focus on for self-care. So as you get a feeling for this, now we're going to conduct a little bit of an intuitive investigation. And we did an episode a few months ago about knowing your intuitive yes and your intuitive no. You can utilize that if you're familiar with it. Generally, yes feels like expansion, no feels like contraction. You might just ask an open-ended question and get an answer. There's different ways to do this. So we're going to start with an open-ended question. If that doesn't work, you can go to yes or no questions and then see how your body responds. So the question here is, what can I do to bring more self-care to my life in this area? What are the tools that I can utilize to care for myself, to bring more love into my system in this area of my life? Give yourself a little bit of space, see if you get an answer. If nothing comes, that's completely fine. The other thing you can do is begin to ask some yes or no questions and just see how your body responds. So let's say you're working on physical self-care. You might ask some questions around what you're eating. You might ask some questions around physical activity. You might ask some questions around sleep, and just keep these simple yes or no questions. Do I need more sleep? And just see if your body kind of expands, which might be a yes, or if your body contracts, which might be a no. Maybe it's not sleep, maybe you need more rest, more time for unwinding, more time alone. So you can start to kind of focus in on the specifics here. We started with a really general question. You may have gotten a direction there. Maybe you got kind of an impression or a feeling or an image. If you're working on mental self-care, you might ask questions, yes or no questions around, do I need to take more breaks during the day? Do I need to step away from my computer? Do I need to give my mind time to unwind in the evenings before I go to bed? These are the type of questions for mental self-care. For emotional self-care, you might ask some questions around processing emotions. Do I need help from a professional to process these emotions? Do I need more physical activity to help process and move emotions? Do I need to gather more tools to help me process my emotions? And if you feel like you have tools, you might ask questions about using those tools. Which tool is going to serve me the most in this particular situation? If you're focusing on energetic self-care, and ask questions about ways to move energy. Do I need more physical activity to move energy through my system? Do I need to focus on processing some emotions to move energy through my system? Do I need to reach out for help from a professional to move energy through my system? Do I need to gather more tools to help me move energy through my system? And if you have tools, you might ask specific questions about that. If I was doing this, I might ask, what type of body work is going to help me move this energetic blockage through my system? Is this something I can do myself? Is this something I need help with in any area? That's a great question to ask. And then allowing yourself to receive that help if in fact you feel like you need help. So playing around with this, knowing you can come back to this, I'm assisting you with some Reiki through this transmission. We're going to step into a little bit of sound. I'm going to use some dimensional frequency expansion just to come in and soothe your system, because really the goal of self-care is to be in that receptive state, that soothed state, that state of rest and digest, of being able to receive, of knowing when it's time to push your limits a little bit to get into that stretch zone, into the yellow, but not all the way into the red. And if we do get into the sympathetic, knowing we have these tools like oxytocin breathing to help bring us back into that rest mode, into that receptive mode. So exploring the breathing here, you can continue to ask questions. You can just allow yourself to receive some self-care here. Receiving care from me, taking the time, allowing yourself to receive is a beautiful step towards self-care. Allowing this beautiful love and light energy of the source of what you are made of to enter your system, to be received, to be integrated, knowing that you deserve to receive love in all moments, and that as you care for yourself, as you learn how to care for yourself, as you choose to care for yourself, you are allowing more and more of this frequency of love into your being, into your system. And you are allowing yourself to expand, and you will be able to show up both for yourself and others in ways that were previously unavailable to you. Allowing yourself to care deeply and to take the steps that demonstrate that care for yourself claims that worthiness, claims that beautiful unconditional love that you deserve, that you are made of, and allows you to share it more widely with others. As you're ready, take one or two more final deep oxytocin breaths, sighing that breath out with an audible ha sound, knowing that you can come back to this. This would be a wonderful practice to repeat. If you're feeling off, if you're feeling like you're not sure what's wrong, you don't know what you need, you can come back and use this meditation to help you dial into what kind of self-care your system is calling for. If you're in a safe space and you'd like to drift off to sleep, now would be a beautiful time to do that. If you're coming back to the rest of your day or evening, just begin to move slowly, doing some little bit of very light, gentle stretches, or just moving fingers and toes to begin. Maybe circling wrists and ankles. Just allowing yourself to fully come back, knowing that you bring with you this beautiful energy of choosing to care for yourself in every moment, whatever that looks like. Sat Nam. The truth of your identity is that you are love. You deserve love. And you especially deserve to give that love to yourself through caring for yourself on all levels of your being. Take one last nice deep breath if it calls to you, and as you're ready, you can open your eyes. Thank you so much for joining me today. Take some time over the next few days or week to notice invitations to self-care and say yes to those, or say no, depending on what feels aligned with you. Perhaps write a little bit of a journal entry each day, areas where you could have used more self-care, areas where you did well with self-care, and let yourself be in this. Let yourself immerse into this topic a little bit. It will serve you greatly going forward on all levels of your being. Have a beautiful rest of your day or evening. Have an expanded rest of your week, and I will see you next week for Wind Down Wednesdays.